Welcome back to the Future of Figure Skating. I'm your host, Anna Keller, and my guest today is Tarah Kayne. Tarah is a retired competitive pair skater and a coach and choreographer. With her former partner, Danny O'Shea, Tarah is the 2018 Four Continents champion and the 2016 U.S. national champion. In our conversation, Tarah reflected on the challenges she had to overcome in her career, including the financial barriers to her training and overcoming injuries. She also shared the importance of mental health and having a strong support network outside of skating. Tara is now taking these lessons into her role as a coach at the Toronto Lakeshore Skating School, where she's working with the next generation of Canadian champions, including Megan Woodley and Lulu Lynn. Hey, Tara. So it's great to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
Good. Well, it's exciting to get to talk to you because I followed your career as a competitive skater and now excited to see that you're coaching. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're up to now and what your coaching life is like?
Yeah, so I currently coach in Toronto with the Toronto Lakeshore Skating School, and it has been really great, honestly, since coming here. Getting out of competitive skating is really hard, and I wasn't necessarily sure what I wanted to do at first, so I took some time, went through a few different options, and then when I kind of landed here, I felt comfortable right away, and I have a really great support base and a lot of awesome students. So it definitely makes life a little bit better.
That's great. What kinds of skaters are you working with at this point? It's mostly singles or?
Yeah, it's mostly singles. It's a high performance training school. So currently I work with students of all levels, but the majority of our skaters are high high performance competitive skaters. We have a few girls on the junior Grand Prix circuit
Mhm.
and a few girls on the Canadian Next Gen team. So that's really where our sights are set as far as a school is really getting skaters to the next level of competition. So
That's great. Are you finding that things are different or similar working in Canada versus your experience with doing high performance in the US?
um yes, in some way, just because all the federations run a little bit differently. I feel like at the end of the day, on the ice is still the same. It's still the same sport. You're still teaching the same things. You're still going through the same things. They're still going to the same type of competition. So in that aspect, it's still the same thing. It's pretty similar, but I think Skate Canada operates differently than US figure skating, which would operate differently than a different federation. So just kind of understanding that has taken me a little bit. And
Mhm.
even some things like the levels are called, like the lower levels have different names. So when I first got here, my students would say, "Oh, I'm star five," and I was like,
What does that
"What?"
mean?
Yeah, I was like, okay, great. And then I would turn around and be like, what is star five? Um, and then like the joke became one of my coworkers was like, oh, the only stars you know are stars and stripes. And I was like,
Do you
sure.
call crossovers crosscuts now?
So I had to kind of like adjust the way I said things because when they're young, they don't understand the different terminologies. So I would say like, okay, like we're doing too many crossovers. And they were like, what? And I was like, cross cuts? And they're like, oh. So I did have to learn kind of different terminologies, I think. There were
Mhm.
a few other small things that were probably like regional terms that I didn't know when I got here. Like I always called like catch foot camel or like a catch foot position, and they call them swans. So yeah, and
I've
they
never
just
heard of that. I kind of like it, but
it's definitely like a prettier thought process, I guess. That it's a prettier idea than just like catch foot. But I kept being like your catch foot position, and they were like my what foot? So and now I have to like really catch myself. And I think now I speak like fluent Canadian skating almost, but
uh-huh.
I talk about crossfoots and swans. So
That's great. Yeah, I went up to skate a couple of times in Halifax and had because I'm based in Maine, and it was like everything was almost the same, but then it's those things that are just a little bit different that then
Yeah.
throw you
It just
off.
like it catches a little bit, but the good thing is I teach with Paul Parkinson, who went to the Olympics for Italy, but
Mm.
trained in Colorado. So he's Canadian, Italian, trained in Colorado. So we have that crossover where I'll be like, what is this? And he'll be able to translate it for me because he spent so much time training in the US. So that's been helpful.
That's good. Yes, yeah, your US to Canadian translation. And do you like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you like living in Toronto? Are you in Toronto itself, or are you?
Yeah, so I live maybe 20, 25 minutes out of downtown Toronto. Um, I love it here. It's one of the my more favorite cities I've lived in. There's always something to do. There's always something going on. There's the food scene here is phenomenal. I care heavily about food, so it's really important to me that I can start like ticking through the Michelin guide when I'm in a place, or like look to see where like Anthony Bourdain ate or something like that. So I really enjoyed checking out the food scene here. So if anyone wants any recommendations, let me know.
That's that is great. Yeah, no, Toronto is one of the places that I still haven't made it to yet, and which feels funny because I feel like I've been through the airport a lot of times, but I've
Not the
just
best airport. I'm not
yeah,
gonna lie. Like flying through Toronto is a little bit tough, but living here is not so bad.
that's great. Um, I heard you on a podcast recently, which is part of the reason that I wanted to speak with you because you were speaking a lot about your experience with injuries when you were competing and recovering from that. And how you were thinking about that and reflecting on it was so interesting. And I know that you dealt with both knee and hip surgery when you were competing and were able to come back from both. But it was really interesting to hear you talk about the ways that looking back, you maybe wished you hadn't pushed through and tried to get back as quickly.
Yeah.
Um, so I was really curious, sort of how, when you were kind of coming up as a skater, how did you learn about injuries, taking care of your body? What kinds of messages do you feel like were given to you, maybe even before you had that first serious injury and going into that?
When I think back, I'm not sure where the messages came from. It's not like I remember a coach saying it or something like that or a parent. Um, but I always really looked up to athletes that pushed through. And I think that's a message that's given a lot, especially by the media, is like, look how strong this athlete was. She had a broken foot and she did it anyways. So I ended up feeling if I didn't do that, then I was weak. And I definitely didn't want to be weak, especially because I was a pair skater and I knew that my partner depended on me. So when you're in that position where I feel like I could have been like, I would have allowed myself a little bit more grace or like to be weaker if it was just me, if I was a single skater, because then I'm only affecting myself. So if I couldn't do it or it was too much pain or something, I'm not kind of like ruining someone else's chance. And that's something I ended up feeling pretty guilty about throughout my career is when I was injured that we both had to withdraw from competitions. It wasn't just me. So I really tried to just like push through as much as I could. And like I would tell myself that like I couldn't feel pain and that like pain was only temporary. So if I push through it now for this practice or something, then I would be able to take the rest of the day and kind of recover from that. So, and
Yeah.
again, I don't remember anyone specifically telling me that or it being, you know, pushed into my head. It just what I felt.
Yeah, it's part of the era we swim in. And like you said, with how athlete stories are told in the media, that we definitely make heroes out of the people who, get knocked down and get right back up again. And it's like, actually, you might be damaging yourself if you do that, but that's not as commonly talked about. When you were coming back from, you think your hip injury was first, I know you said that you felt like you maybe came back to that too soon. Do you think that if you had said, actually, I want to, wait until I'm feeling stronger, you would have had support, or if that just was not part of what you were thinking at all at the time.
I don't think I even considered that. Um, I initially, basically, when you're injured in for US figure skating, you have to come up with a return to play plan. And it's not you, it's your doctors, it's your surgeon. They come up with a plan as to how you like when you're going to get back on the ice, how long it's going to take, what steps you're going to do to get you there. So it's very methodical and it's not just quite kind of or at least for me, I can't speak for everyone, but it's not like I've been injured. I'm going to get on the ice, and on that day, I'm going to start training my triple axel. It's very, okay, I'm going to start, walking, and then I'm going to graduate to standing on one foot, and then slowly off jumping off ice, and then eventually I'll be able to stroke, and then I'll be able to do single jumps, and then like very, very slow. So I had this plan, but I asked for it to be as fast as possible. Like, what is the fastest way I can do this? Like, if everything goes perfectly, like build this plan for the strongest person you know. So that's what was created for me. And I had a fantastic surgeon and a great medical team helping me. But they laid out this plan that was, if everything goes perfectly, if you heal at the speed of sound, this is the way it can go. You can be able to do everything in your arsenal on this day. So in my mind, if I did anything other than follow that plan, I was failing and I was behind my timeline and I was not doing well. So if there was a time where I felt like, oh, I need to kind of pull back, I knew that like I was off schedule
Mhm.
and I was very upset with myself. So it was not really something I allowed myself to consider. I mean, I think if I had to, like if it just couldn't happen, I think I would have been supported because
Mhm.
like what else would they have said? Like, no, you have to. They couldn't make me if it wasn't physically possible. And it would have been
Mhm.
disappointing for everyone, but I think it would have been supported.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and that on like on the one hand, yeah, we want these decisions and like you said, the plan to be, made by the doctors who have that information. But then it does make it harder perhaps for then like you to learn how to feel for yourself. What is
Yeah.
working, what is feeling good, what is, maybe a sign that you could push here but not there. And yeah.
Yeah.
And I know you also said with your knee injury that that was something that maybe if you had stopped a little bit earlier to take care of might not have become as bad. That must feel like very challenging to know when something is the kind of thing you can push through or not. But also that must be a really challenging thing to then have that in your mind later on when you're trying to recover. Did you feel like that also mentally was challenging to think like, oh, maybe if I had done something different, then it would, yeah, I don't know. Did you feel like you were having regrets at that point, or just that you knew you were doing everything you could to try to skate?
I think there's always regrets kind of in everything in every area of life. There's always places you could look back and be like, oh, I could have done that differently, or actually maybe this would be better if I hadn't have done that. But that point in time, it's too late to go back and really change anything. You only know the reality of what you're dealing with at the time.
Mhm.
Um, so of course it was difficult. The whole situation was difficult. Um, and I didn't know really like, well, if I had taken more time, because there was always a caveat, if I had taken more time to recover from the hip surgery, we wouldn't have medaled at nationals. If we didn't medal at nationals, we probably wouldn't have received the funding. And if we didn't receive the funding, like would it was one thing to the next that it was hard to kind of follow and know what would have been the best outcome. And it's hard to look at a medal and be like, oh, this was the wrong decision. I shouldn't have done this. It's like, well, I achieved success, so it was probably the right decision. Um, at least
Yeah.
that's what you think. And then now, and I think I only gained that foresight now to look at it and say, okay, well, it's probably actually safer not to do that. And then maybe I would have had been able to have a longer career with less injury if I would have taken that season off. But who wants to take a season off? That's awful. No one
Well, and you
wants that.
don't know how many times those opportunities are going to come around because it's easy to say you can think about it, and oh, maybe you would have had more opportunities later. But that's one of the things I think is so hard about skating is when so many people's careers are, can be short, then there's also that time pressure to try to succeed as much as you can right now.
Yeah, because we're always told as athletes as well that you only have a limited time to skate. You have the rest of your life to do these other things, but you can only skate while you're young and you're, in shape and you can kind of do these things. So that's kind of in the back of your head as well is like, okay, well, realistically, how long is my skating life?
Mhm.
And if I'm wasting that by, you know, being injured or taking time off, what am I losing out on? And a lot of skating is being seen.
Yeah.
And if you're not seen, you're not building up like the political reputation. Your federation is kind of, you feel like you're being like replaced with other people. So it's kind of this push that like I have to do it because if I don't, then I'm losing all of these opportunities and someone else is going to get them instead.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that makes those pressures are real. And that's like, it's easy for me sitting on the outside to be like, oh, I want everybody to like rest and fully recover and take that time. But I know that really does come with potential costs. And you raise the funding question. And that's like when I think about sort of big picture, how we fund sports and high performance athletes, it always seems like that's the real struggle. Like, yes, you want to fund, like, you want the money to go to the people with the most chances of success. So, of course, it's going to be based on medals and that kind of thing. But then it does come with that pressure to keep performing or perhaps, push back through injuries. And we've seen, I think, a lot of stories of people with um, very firm, oh, if you don't place in the top 8 at this championship, your whole sports funding is going to get cut, not just your own, and that kind of pressure of funding on placements. But when I think about, how else would you do it, then it gets complicated. So I don't know if you have, any reflections on that in your own experience or bigger picture.
It's really difficult to try to come up with a perfect situation for funding because like you said, okay, well, we want to fund the people who are performing the best, but we also need to fund the people who may be performing the best in the future. So you need to keep your eye on kind of your top skaters now, but the future of the sport. So then and what I do think US figure skating does a good job at doing is there's a few different ways you can make your envelopes or your funding brackets. So it's not just based on one competition. So that was helpful as far as, you didn't really have to force yourself back for one specific thing. It's not like
Mhm.
I have to make it back for nationals or else I won't have funding. So if you didn't make it back for nationals, you could have made your funding bracket by medaling at, a championship series event or any of these other ways to do it. So that's a positive. They also have like a developmental bracket, and I'm not sure what's involved with that financially, or if those skaters are just kind of like on the bubble being looked at. But they do, I think, look at a bunch of different factors, and that is helpful because if it was just based on one competition, I think it would be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that makes sense for sure. I know that you spoke about having come from a family that didn't have as many resources as some skating families do, and that you needed to work also while you were training to support yourself. And I know that's not an uncommon situation. But it seems like that was also, very challenging in terms of, maintaining health and also having any life outside of skating too.
Yeah, I definitely did not have a life when I was competing. But yeah, it was difficult. It's all I kind of know as far as looking back at that time. It's one of those things where maybe if I didn't have to do that, things would have been different and I wouldn't have gotten injured, but I don't know how that would have worked out. Maybe then I wouldn't have had the same amount of motivation to make it happen. So it's kind of hard because I think there's a sense of ownership that skaters have when they're supporting themselves, that it means a lot because they know how much it costs. First of all, skating is so expensive, especially like in the US. It's pretty pretty up there as far as sports go. So you know how much it costs to skate a session. So you don't want to waste your time out there. You want to make every second count. And I think maybe if you don't really think about that because it's not an issue, maybe it's not that big of a deal. And you don't really care if you waste time or something. And of course, that's not for everybody, but I could see it.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like that's the case with adult skaters, and I will hear that with from sometimes from coaches as well. It's like, well, if you're working with people that are putting their own money into it, then they're very aware. And that doesn't mean that like kids aren't also sometimes aware of like what their families are sacrificing for it, but there is, you know, there is certainly some of that sense that it's yeah, you're definitely wanting to make it be worth what you're putting into it.
Yeah, I actually think some of my favorite lessons and students that I've had have been adult skaters because they show up, they want to be there, they're ready to work, and they enjoy what they're doing. Where not all kids are like that. A lot of the time they're there because, like mom and dad put them on the ice and now they're stuck out there for the hour. And it's just kind of, they're like, watching the time pass, and that's never an adult skater because they sign themselves up. They do this because they love it, and it's just a different environment when you're working with adult skaters. Not all kids, again, like the kids I work with here, and one of the reasons I love being at this school is because all of the kids work so hard and are pretty dedicated and are really into the sport. So that was one of the reasons I chose to come here. But I don't
Yeah.
want any of my students watching this being like, hey,
No, exactly. Not your students. Other
not
other
my students
yeah.
are great. They would never.
As a coach now, when you think about, you know, dealing with injuries, prevention, with recovery, how do you talk about it with your students? How do you approach it if a student, you know, has an injury on a session?
I think I definitely look at things a lot differently because I know how serious things can get if we continuously just like push through them, or I don't, give it the due diligence. I always want to make sure that they've seen like a specialist or an actual doctor, just because I know, especially with some of my students, will say like, how much does it hurt out of 10?
Mm,
And that is a hard question to answer, especially in skating, because they'll be like, well, 0. And I'm like, 0 at what time? Like when you're laying in bed, is it 0? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, okay, so when you're standing, it's 5. And when you're jumping, it's 8. Okay, so let's walk this back. Because if you just say that to a coach, oh, it hurts 0, then it's like, okay, well, then run your long program. So I think I have a different way of talking to them about it.
yeah.
Okay, like, well, when does it hurt on the takeoff, on the landing? Okay, does it hurt on loop or does it hurt on axle? Like, where does it hurt? Like, what's going on? Like, let's try to figure it out. And if it hurts at the beginning of the session at a 2, and then at the middle of the session at a 5, and at the end of the session we're at a 12, then we can't be on the ice. Like, we need to figure out what we can do without pain. And if that's nothing, then we go home.
Mhm.
And if that means we only do footwork, then we only do footwork. But it's not going to help us if we continuously are hurting ourselves every day and then expecting the pain to go down. And then we get back on the ice the next day and we're hurting ourselves again, because then we're just in this cycle. And that's the cycle I found myself in. So I try to make sure they understand that, and that we are going through that kind of return to play as much as possible without having like a full federation backing, because a lot of them are, younger and not to that point yet. But I just try to, I think, talk to them from the perspective of someone who's been there, and I know they want to skate, and I know they want to not upset anybody and not, make their coaches disappointed or their parents. But no, I try to make sure they know that at the end of the day, their health and safety is the most important because we would all rather be a little bit upset for one day that you can't skate than, have like you have to take the season or quit. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, that sounds really, really helpful, and especially that you can explain from your experience, but also just that awareness, like helping them think through for themselves, like, okay, well, under what circumstances, in what ways does this, because like one of the things that I found really interesting in sort of different coaching styles is the people who are, emphasize a very like do what I tell you kind of approach. And then there's an approach that's based more around like, well, helping the skater figure out what is going to work for them. And doesn't mean that there's like one correct thing, different mixes are going to work for different people. But but yeah, that ability to sort of recognize what's going on with you and advocate for it and have a little bit of that autonomy, even as a kid, I think it's so valuable for their like development as people, not just as athletes.
yeah, absolutely. I think they need to learn to have a voice because if they don't, then they're just going to be told what to do. And most of them listen because they are good kids and they work hard, but unless they are stopping us and telling us how they feel because we can't know that, we don't know how they feel, then we might just be leading them down the wrong path. So unless they're going to speak up, which is a hard lesson to learn as a 12-year-old, to speak up and say something that you think might upset people. But I try to, as much as possible, give them that autonomy because I think it's very important with athletes. And especially as you grow older, you need to know what works for you and your body because you're not always with a coach. And at the end of the day, you have your 6 minute warm up and you have your practice or you have your 6 minute warm up, your competition, and your coach is not out there. So you need to learn kind of how your own body works and your own corrections and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And then especially I'm sure that as kids go through puberty, go through injuries, go through any of these things where it's like what was just working isn't just working, and I have to actually stop and kind of figure out what does it look like for what kinds of adaptations do I need to make that, yeah, that all of that is such an important part of like growing up and of growing up as an athlete for sure. You also, I know, are interested in some of the questions around nutrition and skating. And I know you said you like food and going out to eat and all of that. And so, it's one of these things that I think can be such a fraught topic in skating that where there's a lot of unhealthy culture around eating, around not eating. And I think starting to be more attention to what does it look like to actually have healthy nutrition as an athlete? How do you feel like what your experiences are reflected in, how you talk to skaters about this now? What do you think we should be doing to try to make healthy nutrition be, more a part of the sport?
I think during my time with US figure skating, I was always given very good nutritional advice. Um, I worked with a nutritionist at the Olympic Training Center who helped me through my injuries. And a lot of that was based on having to eat a lot of protein. And in that through that time, I had to end up putting on weight, which was hard because in skating, you are kind of told not to do that. But she was super supportive and we worked through it together. And it was interesting because in my head, I was like, wait, this is bad. But she was praising me because I was doing a good job at it.
Mhm.
So it was an interesting time for me.
It's challenging.
But sorry.
I said, yeah, that's challenging that to
Yeah.
have those different messages from how you learn to feel about it and then what you're being told. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but I had to like reach certain milestones in my recovery and progression, and most of that was putting on muscle, which is hard to do if you're not eating. So I was injured the most when I was the thinnest, which makes sense. My body was just, I think, frail. I am thin naturally. My family is thin. So I think I did get lucky with that aspect in my career. I know it's not that way for everybody, and people don't care. Like, at the end of the day, it's like, oh, this is hard for you or this is easy for you. It doesn't matter. This is what it has to be. So that is tough. I think that a lot of people in skating and US figure skating specifically mean really well, and they give you all of the information that you need to be healthy, but we don't always care. Like, it's like, okay, sure, yeah, I need to eat this, I need to do that, whatever. If I do that, I don't get the results that I want to see.
Mm.
So it's just like, recovering from injury, you get the information. Yeah, I need to, recover and take time and I shouldn't rush things, but you don't care because you have this end goal and you see that your time is running out and you just want to get there no matter what.
Right.
And I think that's where the nutrition ends up kind of suffering for most people
Yeah.
because it's like, sure, I could take care of my body, whatever, but I need to look a certain way or I need to, be in my like fighting weight. Um, and I don't want it to take 3 months to get there. I have to compete in one. So it's just that athlete mindset of I'm going to do what I have to do and I'm going to fight through anything. With my skaters, I use a lot of the same analogies that were used with me with there was one guy who worked for US figure skating for a long time, and I don't even know really like what his job title was, but I worked with him all the time. And we joked that his job was like giving us Chobani yogurts after we got off of the ice. He's gonna hear this and like yell at me or something. He was always giving us like chocolate milks and like snacks, like
Yeah.
always making sure we had stuff. He'd be like, I made dehydrated fruits. Do you want any? So he always had like snacks and was taking care of like the
A really important person to have, like, I'm sure his
honestly,
job was more than being the snack man, but that, like, even that is a
I'm
very
sure he had a
important.
really important job. He also took me to a lot of my doctor's appointments and things like that. Like he kind of was this overarching person through US figure skating for the most of my career. The minute that man left, things went downhill.
Hmm.
The minute I wasn't given the Chobani yogurt immediately after getting off the ice. No, but he used to say things all the time about nutrition where your body's like a car. If you're not, refilling the oil and putting in your gas in the tank, you're going to run out of fuel and you're going to not be able to keep driving. So I say that to my kids if they're like, especially low on energy or really tired. And that's also something my coach, Jim Peterson, used to say to me a lot. He'd be like, what did you eat for breakfast today? And I'd be like, oh, I mean, I had a yogurt or something like that. Um, but he'd be like, do you need to go off the ice and get a snack because like this energy is not doing it for today. So I think I was also given a lot of help through my career with my first coach and my partner as well. They would always be like, go get a snack. Like you need a snack. But I do that with my kids a lot. Did we eat breakfast today? Like, do you need something to eat? Like, you want one of my snacks? So definitely it's the thought process is not on like how thin can we be because it doesn't matter how thin you are if you don't have the energy to get through your program.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I always would think about. I'm like, I'm always like, yeah, if I haven't had breakfast, I often go skate at lunchtime and I'm like, I haven't had lunch yet. I'm struggling. So yeah, the
Not
idea
even
of
that,
a skate
like,
along program without that nutrition, like,
yeah,
no.
I also get kind of mean.
Yeah.
Like if I haven't eaten, I don't think I'm a friendly person to be around. And I think Danny knew that as well. So I think there was a significant portion of our career where he was packing extra snacks just because I'm easier, I'm a nicer person
Hmm. Hmm.
when I am full.
That's very funny. And I also very much identify with that because my pair's partner and I for sure are always like, wait, do you have the snacks that you need? Have we gotten the like peanut butter pretzels for the ride home? Like, are we taking
Yeah.
care of each
Like,
other in that
I
way?
need
Because
some grapes. Like, what can we do right now? And so like I think most people who know me feel that. My mom said that a few times. She's been like, okay, like if we're going somewhere, like maybe you should eat first. So, um, but I think it's like important for skating. Like your brain doesn't function properly if you are hungry. A lot of times I would see skaters I know or myself even like, oh, it looks like you should land that throw. Like you're right there. And then you just kind of sit down. It's like, well, I'm tired. I don't have my body's not firing. So I haven't had my peanut butter pretzels.
yeah, no, I mean that and that makes so much sense though, that just from everything. But I really appreciate what you were saying, that it's not just, having the information, it's having the whole culture set up around you that makes you feel like you can use that information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, I can only speak for myself. I know that other people don't have that support that I initially had from their coaches or their parents or their partners. So it's a different world for everybody. So even though you're given the information, you may not even have the ability to use it. Um, I did, which I'm really grateful for. So
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Um, one of the things that I think about since we're talking about partners and partnering is like, I always think that para girls and ice dance girls to some degree have a really hard position to be put into because there are so few partners available that puts an extra pressure on you to be yeah, to be a good partner and to proving that you're deserving of all of those opportunities. I'm wondering if that's something that you ever experienced or watched other people go through, and sort of how you reflect on what is like. I think even when people are like the individuals involved don't mean it to be, there's often a sort of gendered power dynamic that can come into that with pairs.
absolutely. I, it kind of goes back to supply and demand. Demand is high for boys in skating, especially boys who are tall and strong and can fulfill that role of the partner. And demand is high, supply is low. So it creates a very tricky dynamic between the men and women in the sport. And like you said, even if it's the individuals involved aren't specifically doing it, I think in the back of your head, like you think about it. Like if I wasn't skating with this guy, who would I skate with? Like who is out there for me? And especially as you get into the higher levels, the options are fewer. And they dwindle depending on, okay, I would need a partner who has US citizenship. Okay, well, like narrows things down. Or like if you're a little taller, then you need a taller guy. So then that narrows things down even more. So I think in the back of your head, okay, realistically, like this is it for me. This is my option, right? So then it's suddenly very important for you to keep that person with you. And I think a lot of people are willing to do whatever that takes. And it's tough. And if something happens, you're injured, you can't skate for the season, is your partner going to stay through that? Or maybe there's a better option for them because there are 200 girls that could replace you.
Right.
So you have to have this trust and belief in your partner that they will stay through that. And that's a really hard thing to have.
Yeah.
Um, like I think you have to have a very special connection with somebody to like go through the ups and downs of the sport and not fear in some way. I mean, unless you're setting the world on fire and you guys are winning everything, then wonderful. But even then, there is a personal aspect to it. Do you guys
Mhm.
get along? Are you fighting? And I think for the majority of pairs, like I don't know any pair team that got along perfectly.
Hmm.
So it could be something like, well, sure, things on the ice are great, but this guy's awful off the ice, or, something like that, where it's like, we fight all the time, or, she's mean to me, or something like that. So it creates a really difficult environment.
Yeah.
And I think that people go about it in different ways. There's a lot of like other things offered in some cases where it might be that in some cases, one partner will pay for the other's training.
Mhm.
And it's then you have that to worry about. You're like, okay, well, I can skate. That's all I've got. Like, yeah, so it's a tough place to be for a girl, I think.
Yeah. Did you, have people who tried to who talked to you about that, either, going in or throughout it? And I'm also kind of curious, not that you necessarily can answer this, I'll ask Danny, I'll ask the pair boys, like what they get told about this and sort of the dynamic that they're dealing with as well. Because it's definitely, like, even if you're not going into that situation, like with anything but like good intentions to your partner, those it's still like exactly as you're saying, it creates can be a really tough place.
Well, I think especially with the guys, they're always being told that they could do better.
Mhm.
And I think we read it. I think the girls read it a lot of the time. And it'll be something simple like, no, she has fallen, however many times this season. He would be so good if he had a better partner. Or
Mhm.
like, he would be Olympic champion if he had a more consistent partner. He should look for someone else. Or if this guy was paired with this girl, they would have more success together. So it's so strange to read that and know that people see you as replaceable or are looking at you and thinking you're not good enough for your partner. And it happens in both ways. Like I've seen, and for a myriad of reasons as well. People like, she's too big for him, or too tall for him, or he's not consistent enough for her. She's so great. It's up and down, but I think reading about it is really damaging. And I think a lot of the guys, because of the fact that people want them to stay in the sport, and that's why I specifically talk about the guys, is because they are in general held to a more important standard. They're told, oh, listen, like she is, I don't know, like I'm like, this isn't like a specific thing. I'm just
Yeah.
making stuff up. She always has a cold. This girl's she's always coughing. Like, I just think that maybe that girl over there is healthier. Like, maybe you could try skating with her. So I think it's in the back of their heads a lot of the time that, well, if this doesn't work out, I can find someone else.
Right. Yeah, and it's been interesting seeing. One thing I looked at a couple of years ago was whether just what the average age differences are, because there was a lot of conversation about age differences in juniors. But I was looking and seeing actually the sort of, on average, the guys are 3 years older than the girls was also true in seniors, and also that the guys on average have 3 years longer of a career. So it isn't just that they're starting out with an age difference when you
Yeah.
enter into pairs. And so then looking at that, it definitely, there's that sense that you could bring in a new girl or a girl from even someone straight from singles. And like, obviously, a lot of this is damaging and it's based in supply and demand and it's based in misogyny and all of these things. I'm also just curious, like in your opinion, do you think that it takes longer for guys to learn pair skills than for the girls? Like just in those two different roles that you're playing, or is this all just let's get a new younger model coming in and that sort of cultural thing?
A little of both. Because the second part comes in later, I do think it takes longer for guys to learn pairs. I think you can take a girl from singles and have her be a senior pair skater at the end of the season. That's what I did. And, I think you saw that recently with Leah Pereira, came from singles and is now like a phenomenal pair skater. And I think that gave hope to a lot of single skaters looking at that.
Uh-huh.
If she can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
But I think with guys, it's a lot harder just because the skill set is so extremely different. And especially in singles, you need to be thin, right? To rotate those quads. And in pairs, you need to have broad shoulders to support your partner. So I think just to make like the physical transformation as a guy is going to take longer. And to get to the point where you're steady.
Yeah.
And some pair skaters, the men you look at and you're like, he's steady. I would trust him to lift me. Like he's like a rock out there. And then others you look at and you're like, give him a few more years. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
not skating with that one. But it's probably just because they're newer, right? They don't have that build yet. You look at some skaters who've been skating pairs for 10, 15 years, and though they look really, really steady and confident. And I think those are like the small supportive muscles that don't come right away. Those take a long time. With girls, you can make it a little bit quicker. Granted, you have to have the right build and personality and everything. It has to go into that. As far as the idea of just like trading in for a new different model, I think you see that a lot with the older guys, where it's like, all right, well, I am, however many years old. I've already done so much in the sport, but my partner is older, has been injured, maybe wants to move on because as females with our time in the sport, it kind of cuts into your time out of the sport. And it's like, if I want to maybe look into having children, I
Mhm.
have to make this switch. And they don't have to do that. So they can just be like, that's all going on behind the scenes. And I'm just gonna like import a new one.
Yeah.
So, and then you get a younger girl who has less baggage in a way. And this sounds very negative. I want to be clear. I love pair skating. It is by far my favorite discipline. And I think it's the best discipline, but I can see I can see it as a full spectrum. And it's much easier for guys to just get a new one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's why, why I have these questions, because again, I love pair skating, and I also am learning to be the lifter in a pair partnership where I am the one who was always too tall and broad-shouldered to be, good as a skater. But because I was raised as a woman in the sport, that was just like, well, then you might as well not skate at all, rather than saying, oh, well, maybe this other discipline would be good for you. So because I'm sort of questioning all of those things, then that makes me look at pairs and say, okay, well, how much of this is, how much of this is real? How much of this is tradition? How much of this is the culture versus like actually physics? Or, so all of those like questions I'm trying to come into the sport with an open mind about. And I think like the height difference thing is real. It definitely is easier if there's a height difference.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting to see like what things we can unpack and which things are sort of fixed, at least as fixed as if we're going to do these elements and value them in this way, then we're going to have these results. But
Yeah. Yeah, the height difference thing, 100%. Things are going to be easier for you if you have that height difference. As unfortunate as that can be at times, it does cut out a lot of options for a lot of people. But I think that is there for like that happens for a reason, just because for safety as well. Like you have to have a height or body difference between like the lifted partner and like the lifting partner. Um,
mhm.
Not that it can't be done, it's just harder.
Yeah. Well, and
Um,
that goes to that same point of like, if you had more, more time and the ability to like wait and develop, but a different kind of a technique, maybe you wouldn't have those things. But with the sort of pressures and funneling, it's like, well, no, you're going to choose the people who can do this more easily instead of the people who maybe could do it, but it would take them twice as long to learn the element.
I think in North American culture as well, we start pairs later in general. Like usually it's you do your single skating and then eventually switch over. And in other cultures, you're chosen as a younger kid.
Mhm.
So, like we saw with the Chinese pair Sui and Han, they had a very close height difference, but they had
Right.
also been skating together since they were little kids. So maybe
Right.
they built a timing and rapport with each other that they were able to work through that.
Mhm.
And in North America, we don't really get that option because if you're starting pairs when you're 20, you can't take that long.
Right.
So yeah, like you said, it's if you have the resources, maybe, but usually I started pairs and I competed at senior nationals that season.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like trial by fire.
Right, right. And that's, I think often we see people have that kind of initial, sometimes that like initial success in that first season together. And then like the second or third season might be harder. And that is something that is interesting to see. It's like, okay, maybe everyone is like so surprised and pleasantly surprised that you got into this point and then the expectations hit or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's
But
a
it's
sophomore
interesting to
slump.
watch.
It's
Yeah.
like, and I think also with pairs, like the beginning is so exciting. Like you have all these new things and like you're learning, like there's something new every day. And it's so exciting and you're always reaching a new milestone. And there's kind of all of this enthusiasm. And I think maybe as you get used to that, all of a sudden you're like, this is hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So definitely switching from singles to pairs is so cool and exciting at first. And then I think after a little while, it's like, this hurts.
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely could see that. Even with like you mentioned Trent and Leah, and it was like, they were so amazing the first year, and they were really good the second year, but it wasn't as like everything is bright and shiny and new and like, super easy quite as much the
Yeah,
second
I
year.
think people also like they had their first year, they went so it's like second year, like, oh, they're gonna go whoosh again, but it's like that's impossible. Just like with bodies, like that, what do we expect them to do? Like quad everything?
Yeah,
Like that's crazy. So you can't have that same amount of progress every year just because it's physically impossible. So yeah, the first season I think for most teams is very exciting just because everything they do is exciting. It's like watching a little kid take their first steps. Like their first third triple is like, whoa, they did it. And then after that, the next competition, they're like, well, they didn't do the third triple. Like, get it
yeah.
together. So yeah, I think we expect a lot
No, I
from
mean it's totally how people talk about it. I feel like
yeah.
again, like I watched that happen with Danny and Ellie last season. I watched that happen with like a lot of these teams that have that like that progression, and it is and I think also the overall quality of pairs got better. Like the post-Olympic season, everyone
Yeah.
was kind of messy, and then it's like actually no, we have a more competitive field now. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was, just thinking about mental health and how, with skating being so demanding from such a young age and just taking so much time and energy and mental focus from athletes, like, how can we also try to make sure that skaters have like some life outside of that, see themselves as valued as a person outside of their identity as a skater? And that's something that seems super challenging, but the people who manage it seem to be able to have some resiliency and if you have some other things in your life. And I'm just curious if you have thoughts about that with your students or, reflecting on your career.
Um, yeah, like you said, I think it's very difficult because skating requires so much time and energy. I think a lot of times you don't want to do anything else because it's exhausting. You want to like lay in bed and go to sleep at the end of the day. So you kind of take that ability from yourself to have those outside things. Um, I think skaters who have a really strong family unit seem to have an easier time if they have like brothers and sisters and because it's kind of built in, right? Like you go home, you're tired after skating, but like your family is there and like maybe your siblings are doing something and then they include you too. I think it's harder for skaters who don't have that or maybe you live alone and you go home at the end of the day and you're like, actually, I'm just done. I'm done today. I'm going to sleep. Um, I think what was helpful for me when I was skating, I lived with a host family for my first like 5.5 years of my partnership. And they had a daughter and a son. Um, and the daughter skated as well. Was
Mhm.
younger than I was at the time, but I would come home and they would be like, we're doing family board game night. Like if you want to play games with us. And it's something I never would have done on my own, is be like, okay, after like a hard day, I'm gonna sit out in the living room and like play board games with this like 9-year-old little kid.
Yeah.
I think it definitely kind of helped me socialize,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it kept things a lot lighter. And we always had like family dinners and things like that. So I would have like a really tough day at the rink, and instead of going home and just stewing on that, it would be like, all right, dinner's at 7:30, and then we're going to watch a movie. If you want to, you're invited. So that was really helpful for me. When I moved out from their house, I think I lost that, and it wasn't quite as healthy. I would go home after a hard day and I would think about that all night and how I fell on my whatever. And it was just like something small like that. It doesn't have to be like, oh, after I skate, I go to swim practice and then I go to my dance crew. It's
Right.
impossible, but just like something small, I think like I go home and like I FaceTime my friends, or I do something other than sit by myself.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, and that makes a lot of sense though. Just like as you're saying, like sometimes you need there to be things that are just going to be there for you that are not going to take that extra energy. And yeah.
And that are there even if you don't do well at skating. I think that's an important thing, is that I think for myself, I would not give myself certain like good things if I wasn't skating well or didn't feel good about myself.
Hmm.
Where it's like, well, I was going to, go to the movies, but I, had a shitty skating day. So instead, I'm just going to like stay home.
Mm.
So I think like having that situation where the family I lived with, they knew about my skating. They were obviously at the rink, but like they weren't going to like not allow me to play the board game because I fell on my throw. I was still invited to like family game night. So I still felt like I had a bad day at skating today and I fell on everything. But my home life is still the same. Like people still care about me. And I remember I would like text some of my friends that I knew outside of skating, and I would like, would you still be my friend if I did bad at competition? And they were like, we literally don't care about your competition. I was like, yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
It's
Um,
dating. Most people have no clue. Yeah. Yeah.
don't care. Like, I mean, they cared, like they wanted me to do well, but they were still gonna be my friend if I didn't. And I remember asking Danny that as well. I was like, are you still gonna be my friend if I fall? So I think a lot of it's just knowing that nothing changes for you in your life if ice skating doesn't go well.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's like that for some kids. I genuinely don't. I think if they don't do well at skating, I think their parents are mad at them or their home life changes and they're not given the same love and support. So I think that's where things get really tough. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's always the thing. It's like, we want parents to be the ones who should be always be there for the kids, but
Mhm.
sometimes they're not the source of like that love and support for someone. And that's hard and sad. Yeah.
You shouldn't feel like your family's love hinges on whether you land your double axel. It's not like, and I think that's where things get really tough, is if you feel like your worth off the ice is directly related to your worth on the ice. And I know that got really confusing for me, but it was a personal thing. Like I felt like I was less of a person if I didn't skate well. Um, and maybe that's something I try to tell my skaters as well, that like it's okay. Like you fell, it's fine. Like what's the worst thing that's gonna happen? But it's fine. You're gonna just go to school tomorrow You're still gonna have to take the same test. Everything's fine. Like nothing changes.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
still like you. I'll still teach you. So I try
Yeah.
to just make sure they understand that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's really great. And I think, like you said, it's like the cumulative hearing that sometimes you just have to hear it again and again from different people
Every
in your
time I
life.
had to hear it before and after every competition that I like nothing was going to change, that everything was still going to be okay if the competition didn't go well.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, maybe that was a personal thing. Maybe I was just a little like, like
No, I mean, I think that for a lot of people, I mean, how I think you have to be have a very, unusual mindset to not be impacted by something when so much of your life and the things you're working for are based on how you do in 4 minutes or like the split second of landing one
yeah.
shot. Then that's a lot of weight to put on, yeah, to put on that thing. So it makes sense that you need extra reinforcement of other
Extra
parts of your life
reinforcement
and your
that, yeah,
psyche. Yeah.
everyone still likes you just as much, even
Yeah.
if you fall. It's like I don't care if you fall or if you land, I will still be here. And I think that's what skaters really need to hear. And especially from partners too, if you're skating and you are actively afraid that if you fall, your partner will be upset with you, you don't perform as well. And I like that's something that was clear to me is that when I felt really supported and like we are all on the same team, I would skate very well because I thought like I was going to try my best, but if I started skating scared, it didn't work out as well for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense that like there's, I always think like, oh, people are going to perform well under pressure. Like the sport puts so much pressure on you to begin with. You don't need more pressure from the people that are in your support team necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean people work in different ways, but definitely I think everyone feeling supported and like you can go out there and like give it your all. I think
Mhm.
if you start skating cautious, and that's another thing I try to tell my skaters, like you're skating cautious, you're trying not to fall. And look what's happening.
Right. Right. That, it's so true. And it's one of the things that I feel like, just even in my own skating and like the little ways, like learning, doing bits of like really creative choreography and like learning how to fall on purpose and try to make it look cool and like get up, quickly and make that look cool. Like all of those things, like that sort of take some of the like the fear and anxiety away from it are like, I'm like, okay, yes, okay. If I fall on my butt during that spin, fine. Like I'll try to make it look cool while I get up from it and go on with my next thing. It's like not that
Yeah.
that's like going to take away the impact of like a fall in an important situation, but like even just like when in practice, like trying to take some of that anxiety away from it is it's helpful. It definitely, I know, like again, in my like very low key way, it has for sure helped my skating.
Yeah, I think skating is mostly about having a short memory. Like something bad happens, forget about it immediately.
Yep. Yep. Doesn't matter how many times you fell on that one before. This time it's gonna be great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember being told to skate stupid, and that's that sounds bad, but like if you're too smart, you're overthinking. Like just nope, skate stupid, like zero thoughts, you have zero brain cells out there, and things will probably go better. Um,
I
and
remember seeing like Dennis Vasilievs is one of the like most intellectual people who's a skater. And I remember hearing one of his coaches like yelling at him, stop thinking, like just do the jump, stop thinking. And it's like, yeah, sometimes that is like in that moment, it's not actually helping you. Yeah.
I used to count through all of my programs. I would count every step. So instead of thinking, I would just be counting to four and then repeating. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's what I would do. And the minute I would stop counting, things would go wrong. So, so I think that's where like you just have to keep your mind on something else. And if you start thinking like that you're afraid to fall or that people will be mad at you or things like that,
Yeah.
it doesn't work. So I would just go back to counting.
It's so fun. I love that though, because it's like everyone kind of has to figure out the strategies that are going to work for you. And that's, yeah.
And the funny thing is, like, I hate numbers. I hate math. I don't know where counting came from, but I would count every step. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I would, sometimes count out loud. So,
That's fun though. I like that. So I always like to end the episode with the question about what do you hope for from the future of figure skating? And that is an intentionally broad question. So take it wherever you would like to.
for the sport of figure skating, I would love to see a resurgence of pair skating. And I know a lot of the things I say probably sound negative towards pairs, but it's really not. Like I said, absolutely my favorite discipline. Pair skating changed my life. It is by far the best feeling I've ever had is skating pairs. And even teaching, I prefer to teach pairs. Like it's what I'm passionate about. I will watch competitions and only watch the pairs competition.
Mhm.
Because it's the most exciting to me. So I would really hope to see the discipline grow in a positive way. Um, and especially in the US, I hope that we can increase the popularity of pairs. And I know that we've been trying to do that for years. That's been on the radar for so long. It's not a new thought. But yeah, that's what I would hope for. I of course like we want like a healthy way to do it and I want everyone to be healthy while they skate pairs. And I think there's a way to do that. But
Mhm.
but yeah, that's what I selfishly hope for because I like watching it too.
No, that's great. I love that. And I think that particularly it's like because Paris is where so many of these challenging aspects of skating sometimes come to the fore. And it's like if we can do this in Paris, then we can do it in the other disciplines too. So
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I think I would include ice dance with that. I just, don't have as much experience with that personally. But yeah, that's I think what I hope for. I mean, I still love the sport and I am very passionate about it. So I hope that it continues to grow and I hope that we get more viewership. That's another thought, but like it's not mine to it's not my area, but I hope that it becomes more popular.
yeah. Well, I think we see that there's something about Paris that I think the general public does like, though, at least with how many of the movies about skating and books about skating are about pairs. So, not that we have to, assume that they're always going to be like the hockey player and the figure skater that fall in love because, there's other stories to tell, but there it
I
is funny to see that there is something about it though that does
Yeah, I
resonate
think
with people.
it's maybe the easiest to put your own storyline to and kind of like you saw like Tessa and Scott, for instance, how many like fake little stories went along with their partnership. So I think it's not as easy or fun to create a story about a single skater unless you have two of them and you can create a like a fight.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think people like pairs. I think we just have to like put it out there a little bit more.
For sure. Yeah, well, I hope so too. And thank you so much, Tara. I really appreciate you talking about all of these, deep but important topics and sharing your experiences.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again to Tara for joining me on the podcast. You can find the transcript and links to other resources in the show notes and description. You can follow Tara on Instagram at Tarah Kayne. You can reach me with comments or suggestions for topics and people I should talk to by email at fsfuturepodcast@gmail.com or on Instagram and Blue Sky at FutureFSPodcast. If you appreciate my work, you can also support it with the tip jar at futureoffigureskating.pinecast.co. Remember to subscribe to the Future of Figure Skating on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with your friends.